Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this year's ISE Development Conference. I'm really pleased to be hosting this event yet again, regular in our calendar for many, many years now. We've got a really interesting agenda lined up for you over the next couple of days. My name's Steve Ashwood. I'm Chief Exec of the ISE. Myself and a couple of colleagues we'll be hosting various sessions throughout the next 2 days, so you'll see a number of us coming on and off the screen. A little bit around how the program is going to work in terms of the platform. So you're in the right place if you're watching this now. Please do use the platform fully. You've got the agenda details on there. You can get in touch with attendees. You can look at the speaker bios, and also you can visit our sponsors. And our sponsors, of course, with whom we really couldn't put on an extensive program as we do. So big thanks to DBL, who are headline sponsors, and you'll be hearing from them very shortly, but also to our other sponsors, Capfinity, Connector, SFS Media, and the Smarty Train. So as I said, really great input from them, and we'll be hearing from a number of those sponsors throughout the agenda over the next couple of days. So as I said, the agenda is I was going to say action-packed, but that doesn't sound quite right, does it? Very thought-provoking agenda. We've got subjects covering everything from creating learning communities effectively, how you embed D&I in your organizations and your programs, how you approach blended learning in new ways of working, how to focus on progression and retention. I know that's a subject that's becoming even more to the fore for many employers, how you use data in terms of managing your development programs, and also we'll be talking about generation activists. And we've got a couple of sessions where we've got the voices from some actual graduates themselves who are on program, so it's really important to get their voice through. We were just having a chat in the virtual green room before we started, and we were saying that actually I was reading an article in the FT over the weekend talking about actually resourcing, labour market shortages, and I think the focus on early talent is only going to increase over the coming years, whether it's demographic changes, whether it's labour market shortages driven by things like Brexit, the lack of talent at a more experienced high level, which means we hear more and more employers focusing on that early talent piece and really looking to increase the number of people coming through early talent programs, but then also a real focus on actually how those programs run and making sure that those programs really deliver long-term benefits to the business. Tomorrow morning session, when we kick off, we've got the launch of our development survey with Nicola Thomas, our head of research, and also a panel discussion there. And I think it's going to really pull out some of those long-term themes that we'll be able to talk about in a bit more detail as well. So all that's left for me to say this morning to kick us off really do enjoy the conference. Please engage as much as you can. We've got chat on previous conferences on this platform. It's a very user-friendly platform. Please use chat. Please use the Q&A. Myself, and the other hosts will be keeping a close eye on it and making sure that we feed those questions into the various panelists as they speak. So we've got a great first couple of sessions lined up this morning to kick off the day. Very shortly, we'll be talking about supporting well-being by using behavioural science. And we've got Alice Hooper-Scott from DBL and Nick White from Fujitsu. Then the second session after that, we'll be talking about how to prepare talent for a diverse program once people join the business. And for that, we've got Rena Goldberg-Lynch, who'll be our keynote speaker for that session. So that's enough from me. Alice, do you want to take it away for our first session? Welcome to the conference.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be back with you, albeit still virtually. And yeah, great honour to be here talking about something that we're very, very passionate about at DBL, which is well-being backed by behavioural science. So just a quick reminder for anyone who hasn't seen me for a while or hasn't met me. I'm Alice Hooper-Scott. I'm the Chief Behavioural Officer at Development Beyond Learning, which means I'm responsible for all of our product in our programmes, and I'm delighted to be joined by Nick.
Hi everyone, my name's Nick White. I work at Fujitsu, a tech company. My role's head of talent, so it's everything to do with all of our leadership talent, but I suppose more importantly, all of our early career talent as well. So all of our graduates and apprentices and all early starts as well.
Brilliant. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. And as many of you know, Nick has a rich heritage in early career talent. So while he has a broader remit now, we were talking yesterday, and I know it's still very much your passion, the focus on early career talent. So that's a big part of the lens for today. So again, quick reminder or introduction to DBL if you haven't met us before. So we're an organisation that provides live and virtual training, supporting your future workforce. We've been honoured with awards from the likes of the ISE, which we're very proud of. We think that that's due in large part to the kind of data-driven behavioural science backing that all of our programmes have, and our close partnerships with clients like Fujitsu, like Nick. We've got a diverse global team with offices in originally Sydney, then London, and now we're proud to have a booming office in Singapore as well. And one of the things we're really passionate about is our pro bono and mission to support 1 million young people each year by 2025, doing things like what we did at the beginning of the pandemic, which was providing soft skills to help young people when times get tough. And as we know, we talk about a lot, and we'll see in this presentation, young people entering the workforce is one of the most challenging stages in life. So the more that we can support young people, the better. So in terms of our time this morning, what we're going to cover is a little bit about what's happening with wellbeing, given where we are today. And I'm sure everybody feels like we've been on a roller coaster that isn't stopping rolling. So we can't really say post-pandemic, never mind all the other stuff going on in the world. We're going to talk a little bit about some of our research, which has revealed some inequalities in the experience of wellbeing throughout the pandemic, and then a lens on what that might mean in the hybrid or blended future of work, which is something, again, we're still all trying to figure out. And then we're going to share a behaviourally science-informed model, which is CALM, for thinking about how to approach and support wellbeing for early career talent. I'll share the kind of model and the science, and then open up a discussion with Nick where he shares some kind of insights about the great work that Fujitsu have been doing in that area under each of the 4 tenets of CALM. And then finally, we will make sure that there's plenty of time for Q&A, so you can dig more into any of those areas and ask Nick questions about what's going on at Fujitsu as well. So the state of wellbeing, I mean, I think we've done one of these before where we asked everyone how their wellbeing was. And we're not going to do that this morning, but just as a reminder or a thought about what wellbeing might mean, a definition of it from Matthew Ricard, who has a great TED talk and is a Tibetan monk. He frames it as a deep sense of serenity and fulfillment, and a state that pervades all emotional states. And I think particularly the second point is really important. If you have well-being, then pretty much it influences everything that's going on in your life. Similarly, if you have low well-being, then pretty much everything's impacted. And so well-being is absolutely critical. And it's unsurprising that when we look at the impact of well-being in work, we see how crucial it is. So essentially, what I always say is when well-being levels are high, all the measures that you would want to see go up. So we see a greater attachment to the organisation, and we see a huge increase in motivation, and the measures you would want to see go down. So staff turnover drops by a whopping 87%, sick days go down, and stress levels go down. And, you know, stress levels are related to all sorts of things like increased heart issues, poorer hormonal responses, things like that. So physical and mental well-being are obviously very, very much aligned. And so well-being as an individual, but also for the organisation, is absolutely critical. Now, thinking about the state of well-being and what the impact of the last few years has been, it's really important to recognise that prior to the pandemic, well-being was on a significant downward trajectory and has been for the last decade. I think that's something that we were becoming wise to. Fascinatingly, the global wellness industry is currently around a $4.8 trillion industry. And between 2015 and 2017, the industry grew in economic size at twice the rate of the global economy. So there's definitely been a recognition that this is something that needs attention and that warrants investment. And then obviously the pandemic hit. And, you know, I mean, I could have put up a million quotes, a million stats here that show the impact that the pandemic has had. We'll think specifically about early career talent in a minute, and there's definitely research to suggest that they had a harder hit than many demographics. But looking at employees and people overall, worry, stress, anger and sadness reached record levels, and depression rates in the UK doubled and they tripled in the US. So, you know, pretty much any survey, any governmental report on the state of wellbeing, mental health, as you would expect, revealed overall a kind of negative impact. Beyond pandemic, not post, but beyond, whatever state we're in at the moment with the pandemic, a positive is that this has led to an increased focus on wellbeing. Organisations are, if they haven't already, introducing chief wellbeing officers, huge amount more investment on wellbeing, new roles, new focuses, conferences talking about it, etc. And that is important because it was obviously something that was important pre-pandemic and has become even more so. But it is going to be particularly challenging in a blended future. So the CIPD states that they believe that a hybrid blended future is going to present a greater challenge to managers and organisations than the pandemic itself. And there's a lot of research that suggests that whilst we all had to scramble and get used to remote working, and that was very challenging, particularly from adaptability perspective, the uncertainty and the kind of attempt to navigate as best we can for our organisations and our employees what a hybrid future looks like is going to continue to present as great, or as some commentators believe, even greater challenges for organisations. So it's not something that we can take lightly. A few more results, stats thinking about wellbeing at work in case anyone isn't yet completely convinced. Various reports suggesting that 7 in 10 employees report suffering or struggling rather than thriving, 60% reporting anxiety. That's translating into much less engagement at work, so 80% suggesting that they're not engaged or are actively disengaged at work. 1 in 5 people claiming that productivity has been impacted by poor mental health. And the economic cost of that is significant, so lack of engagement is leading to an 8.1 trillion negative impact on the global economy, and 10% drop in GDP every year. So a really, really important area for us to be thinking about. And given that this conference is really focused on what the impact of blended work, a blended future is, we wanted to just pose a question and ask you to start sharing in the chat what blended working looks like to you. Now, that might be what your organisation's doing. You can answer that in terms of it's 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. That might be what opportunity you think it offers in terms of flexibility within a framework. We just want to start sharing as a community the different types of blended working, the different experiences that your organisations are planning to put forward, so that we can see the diversity of that. Every conversation we've had, it looks slightly different. So we just thought it would be useful to share. So if you're happy to jump into the chat and share from your organisational perspective and from your perspective what blended working looks like, that would be great. I'm going to carry on and share some stats around wellbeing and equality, but please jump in and let us know what you're thinking, and so we can learn from each other as a community. So thinking about wellbeing and equality, as I mentioned, we conducted some research throughout the pandemic, essentially over kind of 2020, 2021, with lots of people, including desk research, global survey, over particularly Southeast Asia, UK and Australia, from August 2020 to May 2021. One of the biggest findings, which we thought was important to share, is that there were, during the pandemic, wellbeing gaps. So what we found, and I'll talk briefly about why these seem intuitive in some cases, is that leaders had better well-being than the led. So leaders versus their employees had better well-being. Men had better well-being versus women statistically, and established talent had better well-being versus an early career. So from the led versus the leaders, employees were more likely to state, significantly more likely to state, that they're satisfied with their life nowadays and that the things they do in their life are worthwhile than employees. And interestingly, the perception gap, so the probability that business leaders would think that their employees' well-being was okay, was quite high. So 71% of them thought that their employees' well-being would be very good to good, whereas the actual on-the-ground report, the lived experience, was more like 54, so more like half the workforce feeling that their well-being was very good to good. And what we know is that as leaders, or the more senior you are in an organisation, the more autonomy you have. So the more you're able to kind of control your day, potentially take advantage of some of the things like being able to choose when to go for a run, walk away from your desk if you want a break, etc., etc. And one of the things, and Nick's got a really good example of this at Fujitsu, the way they're trying to tackle it is more junior people felt much more tied to their desks. And so that flexibility, that, freedom actually could turn into a real negative where they just didn't know where to switch off. So really, really important to understand that the more junior you are in the organisation, potentially, the more impacted your well-being was by a feeling that you couldn't take advantage, couldn't exercise your own autonomy, despite being in an environment outside the workplace. Again, statistically overall, doesn't mean this was the experience for everyone, but women were reporting lower well-being than men. And there are lots and lots of reports about why that might be, the continued pressure for sort of more housework, more likely to take on childcare. And there's also sort of research suggesting that women are more prone to feeling a lack of confidence, and that confidence is affected more remotely for lots of reasons, which we'll come on to talk about, like you're less likely to get affirmation. So imposter syndrome gets worse in a remote context, and that's something that women are more likely to report than men. So both from a kind of confidence perspective and potentially from the amount of work they were having to do, women suffered more. And then thinking about early career talent, well, we could have filled hundreds of slides with headlines like this from over the pandemic. And we all know as early career practitioners and experts that the people that we've been hiring and trying to develop, and I've started to hear about Generation C, the post-COVID generation, were heavily impacted by the pandemic. Mental health significant, like the way they were living, and much more concern about their future kind of just thrown into doubt. So hardest hit by the pandemic, reporting feeling most likely to report that they felt discouraged or concerned by it. And then looking at early career talent in the workplace, future workforce is much more likely to say that they need support in terms of building relationships, and they're much more likely to view building relationships as their most important challenge. And we know that their confidence was also hit. So during the pandemic, they were less likely to report that they felt they were performing well, and they were more likely to want support for training in a remote context. They, as I've sort of just mentioned, were more likely to report significantly more likely to report lower levels of autonomy than established talent. And a lot of that is to do with some of the well-cited disadvantages that came as a result of the remote working, and will continue to be a challenge for hybrid working. So, it was easy to see on many Zoom calls the challenges that some of our early career talent had working in small rooms, sharing flats. Translates to a much higher risk to well-being, obviously, as reported by the Mental Health Foundation. We know that least experienced workers need the office most, and the 18 to 24-year-old reported being least preferring to work at home. And 89% of early career talent workers reported having difficulties working from home. And so as we move into a kind of future blended world, it's worth recognising that there have been some of these inequalities throughout the pandemic, and some of them will be exacerbated. Some is more likely to want to work remotely. So established talent, women and minorities broadly report being more keen to work remotely. Leaders, early career talent, men and people of white ethnicity are more likely to want to go back into the office. And there's a lot of research to suggest that this could, if it's not kind of addressed properly, lead to widening gaps in certain areas, because unfortunately it's still the case that not being in the office can have a negative impact on kind of your career development and things like that. So it's really, really important for us to think about that as we think about our blended approaches moving forward. So that's a kind of snapshot of where we are from wellbeing, and starting to think about some of the risks from a blended future. But also, obviously, there's lots of opportunities to turn this all into a positive. And what we did at DBL, as well as the research we did to kind of get an understanding of the state of wellbeing, was we conducted a meta-analysis based on a load of journals, recent to historical reports around wellbeing. And we have developed a model which is based on 4 key tenets, which are shown and proven from the meta-analysis to significantly support wellbeing. And as early career talent practitioners, as managers, and as individuals, these are the 4 areas. And as a behavioural scientist, one of my favourite principles is if you want someone to do something, make it easy. Hence, I like anagrams, I like things like this. These are the 4 areas you remember. If you want people to have wellbeing, think about how to support them being calm. And the 4 areas are confidence, adaptability, links, and motivation. I'm going to briefly talk about why these are important, and then I'm going to start to have a conversation with Nick where we get into some practical on-the-ground examples at Fujitsu, and I'll share some kind of broader insights from the work we've been doing. So the first one is confidence. Why is it important? Confidence is one of our core psychological needs. From self-determination theory, we know that humans have 3 core psychological needs. One is to feel capable, confident. One is to feel autonomous, and one is to feel connected. And that model underpins a lot of the thought that's gone in here. And why is it particularly challenging in a hybrid future? Well, one of the things that research has shown is that hybrid context, remote context and hybrid context can actually damage confidence because people are less likely to give each other positive affirmations. People are less sure about kind of the framework, what's going on, and uncertainty is often the kind of the killer of confidence. So the context is incredibly important in understanding human behaviour. The context in which we have been operating and are operating makes it much harder for people to feel confident, much harder to feel confident in their day-to-day roles, much harder to feel confident in where we're going. And so supporting confidence is something that's absolutely crucial. A fascinating example of an unintended consequence that might have happened through the pandemic is research by Asana suggests that one of the biggest negative or biggest detractors from confidence during the pandemic was having a micromanager as a boss. So when we're thinking about how to support confidence, not only think about the individual, but also we need to think about how we're empowering our managers to have the right behaviours in order to support confidence within our people. So confidence is crucial, as is the ability to be adaptable. I sort of feel like, we've talked about needing to be comfortable with change, needing to see change as a constant pre-pandemic. Then during the pandemic, adaptability was a big buzzword. I doubt I'm alone in feeling like, even though we were saying how important being adaptable is, I didn't expect to have to still be this adaptable, with all the sort of problems going on in the world and the ongoing uncertainty with COVID and global politics and so on and so forth. It does just feel like, we're having to kind of dig into the grittier end of adaptability. So a really important skill just got even more important and isn't going away clearly. It's very challenging because we're hardwired to dislike change. Forbes reports that the lack of certainty around hybrid future means a significant challenge around people's confidence and comfortableness with adaptability, because there's such a lack of certainty about what's going on. And there are obviously some great things that employers can do to enhance adaptability, which we'll talk about in a minute. Links is all about connection and feeling a sense of belonging. One of the biggest things hit by the pandemic, we all know we're not in a room together as we were, was it 3 years ago, 2020 last time, just literally on the eve of the pandemic, when we were all joking about the amount of hand sanitizer and had no idea that we would still be here this much later. We're not connecting face to face as much as we used to, and it's been very, very difficult to maintain the same level of relationships and not get sucked into just working on the work and kind of keeping the contacts going. And there's going to be an interesting thing in the hybrid future. INSEAD's reporting that the hybrid future is going to lead to an interesting cocktail of reasons why people go back into the office, a combination of social pressure and social pleasure. So links, really, really important. We definitely want to have connections, and it's going to be interesting how we support people in a hybrid future to want to come back into the office, but not to necessarily feel pressure to come back into the office if it's not right. And how we help support people who may be in the office or not in the office. How do we keep that level of connection and that sense of belonging fair? It's probably going to be one of the most challenging areas. And the final tenet is motivation. So motivation fuels goal-oriented behaviour, is a key to success and a key to thriving. And one of the things that's been a pandemic of languishing. So one of the emotions and one of the feelings, the states that a lot of people have been reporting, and it was a great article in the New York Times by Adam Grant, is this idea of languishing, which means joyless, aimless sense of stagnation, which kills your motivation. So it doesn't sound very nice. And that's one of the things that all of the impacts of the pandemic has kind of caused. And I think that's something that we are seeing and experiencing. Lots of employees, you know, some of the kind of churn that's going on is that sense of just sort of dissatisfaction, which we maybe need to help people understand is a result of the very difficult time we've been through. And a hugely important part of that will be helping people to regain a sense of purpose, within our organisations, within their roles, because purpose is a killer of languishing, and motivation is essential. So that's this sort of whistle-stop tour of our CALM model. And at this stage, I'm going to open up a discussion with Nick so that he can start to share some of the fabulous stuff they've been doing at Fujitsu, some practical tips and advice. And so, Nick, we're going to work through the CALM model and ask you to share some examples, starting at the beginning, of some of the things that you've been doing at Fujitsu to support confidence.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Alice. And you know, and thank you for inviting me on to have this conversation. I think we've got loads of good stuff to share, but equally, you know, we don't profess to be, you know, the ultimate answer to all of this stuff. So more than happy to share some of the stuff that we're doing. I think with confidence, I think you mentioned that kind of earlier on around actually, you know, taking time away from your desk is really important, but actually having the autonomy and the empowerment to actually do that, especially for early career talent, is sometimes quite scary. So here at Fujitsu, we've got a very flexible working policy, right? I manage my own time. The people who I manage, I expect to manage their own time. And actually, if we wanted to take some time away, if we wanted to finish early, right, that's fine. You know, you're kind of judged on the output. But if you're new to an organization, or if you're in a role which is a little bit more desk bound, then actually kind of, you know, having the autonomy to do that is scary. So one of the things we did quite early on in the pandemic during lockdown is we actually kind of said, look, book an hour, and kind of, you know, people could kind of get an actual kind of physical hour from the kind of SharePoint page in the News Connect story and put it into your calendar and call it work your way. And it was encouraged, you know, our leaders kind of talked about it. It was they tweeted on the front page of our Connect kind of intranet about what they're doing during that hour. And it gave people permission to just go for a walk, go to the gym, go and do some exercise, to physically spend some time away from your screen. And it gave people that kind of real empowerment and permission, I suppose, to actually do that. And you know, it was really interesting kind of talking with some of our grads, you know, trying to put a meeting and saying, well, actually, that's my hour. And people kind of did take it. But it was a really simple thing of just giving people the permission that they felt they didn't have, even though they did. And that went down really, really well. A few other things that we're kind of doing. So we're now talking about financial coaching for people, especially our early career talent. It's always been a real passion of mine that actually, you know, we recruit graduates, we recruit apprentices, we give them a salary. For many, it's their first full salaried role, and it's quite a significant amount of money. And how do we responsibly teach them about money? You don't get taught this at school, right? You don't get taught about the importance of a pension, the importance of saving. You know, if you want to buy a house, kind of what type of spending patterns do you need? So I've always been really an advocate of we need to have an offering here to help our kind of, especially early career talent, but anyone in the organization. And we're going to start to do that, where we'll offer financial coaching. It'll be an opportunity to sit down with someone, you know, outside of Fujitsu have a conversation about your goals, your life goals, and what that means for finances, and then kind of you'll get a report basically about kind of your spending patterns, what that means, and then the offer to get coaching, I suppose, on top of that, to say, well, how's that going, right? And it's not advice, right? Kind of, we're not kind of going into the financial advice sector, but actually people will be pointed to advice. And actually, I'm really excited to get that up and running, because I think it's super, especially in the time that we're in right now with, cost of living increases, etc. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Nick. I absolutely love the being able to book an hour into your day. And I think not every organisation will do that, but it highlights essentially what that did was give people the confidence to know what they could and couldn't do, and the confidence to be able to do that. Something that managers can do, even if they can't say you can book an hour out your day, is be really clear about the psychological contract between the manager and the employee. Like, this is what I expect, so if you're a kind of manager who's happy, and an organisation who's happy to say, well, as long as you're meeting your objectives, I don't mind if you're not at your desk all the time. I'm not going to be, I know some organisations, there's that fear of, is someone watching the green?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like,
we were really we spoke with our managers right whenever we kind of had an intake of grads or apprentices. So when they're working from home, you have to be really clear on the kind of unwritten norms. Yeah. Actually, when do you log off? Right? Yeah. Kind of, if you're not in an office and you see people literally leaving, well, actually, when do I work to? Is it 5? Is it 5:30? Is it 6? Is it 6:30? Is it 7? When do I go for lunch, and how long can I take for lunch as well if I don't physically see people going to the canteen, etc. Yeah. So we were really clear with our managers around, actually, you need to spell that out. Yeah. To someone who hasn't got that frame of reference, because actually, again, you get kind of not healthy attachment to screens and laptops, etc., which just isn't good.
No, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, because having been much more established, had a long career, it was difficult to navigate. Like, do you start work when you would have started commuting, or do you start work when you would have got into the office? And of course, without those parameters, like it just a complete swirl. So two things. I think empowering managers to have those conversations, and empowering early career talent to take autonomy, and actually to say, listen, it would mean a lot to me if I could start the day with a run, or whatever their thing is, and just to get it agreed, rather than kind of, one of the worst things that can happen to people is learned helplessness, which is what happens when we increasingly just don't know what to do, totally lack confidence, and you sort of don't ask. It's like, actually remind people, give them permission to, to say what's going to help you be the best version of yourself, because that's the best for you, that's the best for us as managers and us as an organisation. So confidence around how to navigate your days, which will be even more important in the hybrid future. I mean, one of the things is empowering people to say what they would like. Now, the business may not be able to honour it, if they want to work from home entirely, that might not be possible, but having the conversation, so at least both parties are understanding what the parameters are, and the best can be done. So confidence in a hybrid future is going to be really, really critical, and those are two lovely examples. Thank you, Nick. Moving on to adaptability then, what kind of things were you doing at Fujitsu to support?
Yeah, so that thing about adaptability, and I think you kind of just mentioned it there in terms of, what does hybrid working look like? What does kind of remote working look like? And I think, we're probably all in this situation of, we've worked from home for 2 years, we want to encourage people back. We're not going to be an organisation. We've successfully ran a business for 2 years working from home. So that doesn't feel like, we do see absolutely the benefit of, in-person work as well. So we've kind of come up with a structure which says, well, actually, how do you decide where you work? So we've come up with a concept called the 6 C's, and it's called Work Your Way. And I think what it does is it gives a real kind of framework to make decisions about, I've got some work to do here. how do I do that work? And the 6 C's, and I'm going to forget one of them, I'm sure, but it's customer work. So actually some of our kind of workers need to be kind of working alongside the customer physically. Collaboration, right? So if you're working on stuff kind of together, etc., that can be done, remotely, but it's just the power of being in the room. To collaboration, coaching, so actually any type of training, yes, it does work, but actually there's a choice about, do you want to do it kind of physically as well? Colleague preference. So actually, not everyone, you've kind of mentioned, you had a slide there around, different preferences and the types of people who like it. So, if you want to go in, you can kind of go in. And I think we are seeing definitely our early career talent saying, well, actually, let's all go in on a Wednesday, right? There's no necessarily purpose to them all working together, but they just want that social connection. And, that's kind of happening. Co-creation, right? So if you are kind of creating things together with the customer, it's better doing it. And there's another one which I've forgotten, which I'll probably remember by the end. But actually, I think what it kind of does is it kind of removes the, you've still got the autonomy, you've still got the decision making. If you're a manager in this organization, you can say, right, kind of, and now we're going into the office. But I think what it does, it gives a nice framework to think about purposeful office work. So, you're not just going in to sit, we're not forcing people to come into the office to just sit on calls from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, which you could just do at home. But actually there's a purpose for people actually getting together. And I think there's a really neat framework which takes out, all of that. Well, do I not? Kind of, it's a really kind of, hopefully quite easy framework. 6 C's, easy to, well, clearly not for me because I've forgotten one of them. But yeah, nice way kind of for people to think about it.
No, it's brilliant. And I think that is, if we think about the fact that people don't like uncertainty, one of my favourite models is Covey's circles, where we always encourage people to focus on what they can control. I think that was one of the most important things in the pandemic. Not an awful lot you could do about COVID, but what could you control, whether it was going for runs or focusing on your career, whatever it was. I think that's a huge onus on organisations and managers and us as early career practitioners now to help reduce as much uncertainty as we can, be as clear as we can. I love the C's because I think it gives people confidence around parameters, confidence around decision making. That gives them autonomy back. They're not sitting there going, I don't know whether I'm meant to be in or not. It's great. Some organisations will need to go down the route of a 3-line whip everybody back in which case I think the suggestion would be, where can you give autonomy back? Where can you, honour the fact that, because there is a big thing around, we expected people to pivot to remote working overnight, and what's our kind of give back in terms of being a bit more compassionate rather than just like straight back in. So what kind of autonomy can you give them within that framework? But where there are decisions to be made about when you're in, the clearer you can be about the framework to make those decisions, so people can be like, oh, well, it's obvious today because no one's in the office, I'm not going to go in, or I'm going to spend all day on Zoom, so I'm not going to go in. I think that's superbly helpful. So yeah, the clearer organisations can be to reduce uncertainty, so that we're not, we're focusing on what we can control and not worrying about things that we don't know and don't understand. We're not leaving things too opaque. It's incredibly powerful and important. Which brings us on to probably my favourite, and the one I think is most important. It's very linked to belonging and that whole world. And belonging, feeling a sense of belonging, is about as correlated to well-being as it could possibly be. So essentially, if you make sure people feel connected and that they belong, you'll have done a massive tick against the well-being world. So yeah, just such a rich area for you at Fujitsu. Tell us about some of the things you did to support links.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of take is actually kind of people, just want to connect. And actually, as HR people, as practitioners, I think it's important for us just to provide the platform and then the opportunities for people to come together, and not necessarily in a work context. People just want the opportunity to connect and talk. So few things we did kind of quite early on. The thing that went down really well was virtual speed networking. It's something we used to do physically in person, right? We used to get grads, apprentices together in a room with a lot of senior people and literally make them speed date as part of a career type module. And when we kind of thought, oh, what on earth are we going to make this virtual? It just worked superbly well. And actually kind of, we've run it a few times where if you just get kind of grads, apprentices, whoever, right? Kind of could be anyone in the organization, plus kind of networkers. And because, you know, we've used Zoom as our kind of platform, it's just really easy to say, right, you're going to go, I'm going to set up a load of breakout rooms, you know, people in them, and then I'm just going to rotate people around every 5 minutes. And it's a real super way to kind of very quick and easily to get to meet people, to kind of talk to people that you might not necessarily come across into. You know, I think we're kind of creating some of those water cooler moments about bumping into people in the office. And actually, you know, it's 5 minutes, you know, if you've really enjoyed it, you can connect with them outside of that session. That's just, it's come down really, really well. Equally, we kind of recognize that people find the actual networking quite intimidating for some people, right? Kind of, you know, getting to meet ahead of a business line is kind of, oh my God, I need to prepare myself and I need to think about what to say. And this was driven by our grads and apprentices. We came up with something called, so it was anonymous networking, and then it became virtual anonymous networking, and it became Chatty Van. And the idea is kind of, we'd kind of create a session that anyone in the organization can sign up to. When you sign up, you're then given a pseudonym. So when you log into Zoom and ask you to kind of put your name in, you put in the pseudonym and you join without your camera on. So actually no one knows who's in the session. And what we kind of did is just pose a question, right? Kind of, what's your morning routine, right? Or whatever. And then just randomly put people into breakout rooms. So actually they didn't know who they were in a break. So you could have been with our CEO, our MD, you could have been with a grad, an apprentice, but actually it takes out the bias of, God, I'm talking with someone really senior, or I'm talking with someone who I don't value, but you know, we kind of, you take out all of that bias and actually kind of, you can connect on a theme or a topic. And actually kind of work out that actually, you know, got lots of things in common, and that's gone down super well. On things like, you know, Men's Day, we did a roundtable discussion about, you know, issues that men face, and in it was kind of stuff about toxic masculinity. And actually, you know, only just yesterday, kind of we've announced that actually we're going to do that just on a monthly basis. You know, it's not just solely open to men, right? Kind of anyone can kind of join, but they're just open roundtable discussions. So equally, we did one on menopause in the workplace and taking the stigma out of menopause. If you're a female and you're kind of you're going through the menopause, how do you have that conversation with your manager? If you're a manager, how do you make adjustments, and what is acceptable, what's not? And actually, I think, you know, I think this, the link section for me, I think is absolutely, you know, the biggest takeaway in terms of how do we as practitioners, HR folk, early career practitioners, provide the opportunities for people to come together, and doing it on common themes. It's just a really great way to do it.
No, I think that's so true, so important. I love the Chatty Van, not only for the name, but again, you can kind of see we're forcing each of these examples into one of the four, but clearly that gave confidence as well, because exactly. You know, a big issue we knew was, how do you network virtually? Like, who knew how to do that as the only way that you do it? And obviously for early career talent, like, you know, bootstrapping them into being able to do it kind of in a safe way, then it's been done, and then, you know, that's kind of the first step in having confidence in anything. You've got good examples of it having worked. And I think the idea of connecting over themes is really important. And in the world we're moving into, it might be important to connect groups about what it's like to work in a hybrid world. Like, if more women are working from home, what are the challenges? We need to make sure we understand that. If early career talent are more likely to be back in the office but are missing their managers, we need to understand that. So I think getting groups together where they're sharing experiences, and it was one of the things we did at DBL really early on. We reduced the amount of telling that we did in our sessions and opened up the amount of sharing, because people just wanted to understand that they weren't alone in their context. Like, I would sit in groups, virtual groups obviously, and just see people just like becoming bigger because they realized they weren't alone in struggling to manage remotely or feeling lonely. Or so I think that, yeah, making sure that we're creating moments of connection and navigating the challenge of there will be some people in the office and some people at home and different days and things like that, and making sure that different groups don't feel more or less involved is going to be so key. So yeah, I mean, I think all four are important, but I agree with you. Like, if I was going to put a razor lens, if that's the thing, on one, it would be links. And finally, before we move to open up to questions, motivation. Nick, what you guys have a lovely example here.
Yeah, so you mentioned about purpose, right? And actually, one of the things that we're doing, and it's really it's driven top down, and it's not necessarily under the banner of well-being, but I think it really falls into it. We're rolling out something called purpose carving, which is actually, we want everyone to experience, understanding what their purpose is. And there's a really neat workshop that's kind of been driven from the top and kind of down. All of our senior execs have gone through it, and then their direct reports, and then kind of the rest of the organization will go through it. But it's a chance to kind of really understand, well, why am I here? What am I doing? What are my internal values? What are my motivations? And actually, it gets really deep, really personal, but it's kind of a real, well, why do I get out of bed in the morning? What value am I adding? And the idea is we link that to the company purpose, and people can kind of then start to see kind of, well, how does my individual purpose link to kind of overall company purpose, which I think is really neat. Last year, I think, is then kind of say, well, we then just re-looked at our performance management process. We threw it up in the air and we did away with it. The whole kind of notion of setting goals at the beginning of the year, reviewing those objectives 12 months later when the world has moved on, we've got different priorities, and then assigning a performance rating against it, which is full of subjectivity, bias, and actually in the grand scheme of things means very little. We just did away with, and actually we have what's kind of called connect conversations, so kind of more touch points that a manager has with their employee, where they talk about someone's impact that they've had, and they give them kind of feedback about how they can have more impact, and more importantly about what learning that they need to do. And it's a real coaching conversation, and it's more regular than setting a goal, maybe it's reviewing it mid-year, and then a full kind of scary performance review at the end of the year. So really kind of changed that on its head, and had some really fantastic feedback around, I have a bigger sense of purpose, I understand what I'm doing, and I'm getting more regular feedback on it, and I can understand how my impact relates to what the company's trying to do now as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll ask Steve to come back on and open up the Q&A now. Final thing for me to say is, all our research culminated in a white paper, which you can find on our website, or obviously reach out to me or any of the team on LinkedIn. We have a virtual room, so you can come and have a chat to us if you want more research on well-being and insights into how to support early career talent in the future. But Nick, thank you so much. And Stephen, over to you for Q&A.
Great, thanks. That was a really great session, really covered such a broad amount of themes. I couldn't have asked for a better session to open up a development conference. So we've got a few minutes for questions. So we've got some questions and some quite interesting questions come through. So I'll crack on with those. Very easy one to answer, first of all. Yes, slides will be available after the event, but also at the end of today, you'll be able to go back and look at the videos because they'll be on this platform. So yes, all that will be made available. So first question here at the top of the list, because people, if you haven't gone into the Q&A box, you can vote your favorite question. So I'll go through them in order. So the first question, with always on technology, a faster pace of change, is it that we're having to I guess, re-engineer, redesign the way our brains think, or actually should we be thinking about work redesign so it doesn't impact and the quote here is, so it doesn't distress our primate brains so much?
Wow, great question. I can see why it was number one. I suppose the cop-out answer is we're still trying to figure that out. The behavioural scientist answer, psychologist answer might be it's easier not to work against biases. So a lot of behavioural science is all about how do you understand what our biases are, or what our prime reptilian brain, primal brain is like, and kind of go with the flow. So I think that is an important lens through which to look at. And I think one of the things about adaptability is actually encouraging organisations, cultures, managers, people not to revert to old ways of thinking, not because it is tempting. You can see some organisations are doing it. They're like, well, we do need to all be back in the office. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but I am saying I think we need to question that. Like, it is the case that everybody managed to go remote. So I do find it strange that some organisations are so quick to say, no, it's a three-line whip back in. So I think the more that we can question, okay, well, if we understand that this is how people work, or we understand that these are practices that are damaging people, rather than kind of just going with the way things are already, can we rethink how it works? Can we rethink? So I think that's absolutely true in terms of, we know people who have social media breaks, it makes them much happier. We know that a lot of the stuff, unfortunately, that we've created is doing us damage. And there are various behavioural science books that talk about kind of how do you switch off, and a lot of the tips about well-being are like, how do you get disciplined? Don't have your phone in your office or your room so I think you're absolutely right. Like, and it's surfacing some of those issues so that, because we just, it's addictive, we've got various books about how easily we get addicted. Behavioural scientists have made us addicted to things like the algorithm on LinkedIn, which will, human beings are more attracted to things when they're unpredictable. So the reason why you don't know where some of your posts are really good and some aren't is because a behavioural scientist has made sure that the algorithm isn't predictable, because you'll be more, and that's true of all social media apps. So we need to surface these things to be aware of them and then think about how to change them. And habit change is going to be really important. We've got an exercise later today, which is to try and help introduce some better habits around well-being. And you have to be disciplined to introduce a habit. So if you're weaning yourself, if we're trying in work and in our own lives to wean ourselves off constantly being online, which is damaging, then we need to kind of work with our biases, be aware of the challenges, and be quite prescriptive and deliberate in what we do to change. But excellent question, and I don't know all the answers yet. That's my initial thought. Nick, anything you'd add?
I remember listening to, we had a speaker called Steph Peltier who said she's a happiness expert, and she did, her view is our brains haven't kept up, and evolution hasn't kept up with the pace of change of the world, right? Advancements in technology is exponential, and our brains haven't kept up with that. Absolutely not. But the world isn't going to slow down. The rate of change actually isn't going to slow down. So we do need to think about, well, actually, how do we build in and how do we design strategies that help people cope? So I think, one of our biggest learnings when it comes to well-being is, you don't do an initiative of well-being, right? Kind of the Take Your Out was a great initiative. We kind of did corporate, the networking is a great initiative, but I don't think you can do one or two initiatives and say we do well-being. And I think where we are now is actually how do you build well-being into the design of work? So actually kind of, you know, the whole autonomy about how do you work your way that is best for you, and giving managers the kind of autonomy and the freedom to kind of say, as long as someone's achieving what I need them to achieve, it kind of doesn't matter if they're working in a cafe in town or at home or in the office. Actually, what kind of works is they're happy doing it in a way that's happy for them. So yeah, I think there is a case of how do you design well-being into your job design and the way you're in your company culture as well.
We've got about a minute left, so I'm going to try and squeeze 2 questions into a minute, which is probably overly ambitious. Talking about adding stress into the workplace. Quick, yeah, very quick. So next question was, what are your thoughts on a 4-day week? I like the idea personally. I did try it once for a while, but then I got dragged back to a 5-day. So 4-day week, is that the solution?
There's a lot of research to suggest it works. There's organisations that are promoting it. I'm a big fan of data. So I think, you know, organisations that are brave enough to try it will have more data. I'm pro it based on what I've seen, read, and I like the idea of it too, Stephen.
What do you think, Nick?
I think if you're thinking about it, I think pilot it, go for it. Yeah, absolutely. It falls into the work your way, right? Kind of, you know, if you can make it happen and it makes someone happier, and try it and see what happens.
Right, so I'm going to merge 2 questions here because I think there are themes that are compatible. And one of the questions was talking about supporting managers to make these adaptations that we've been talking about. And then the other question was about
I've lost Stephen.
Yeah, I've lost Stephen.
Alice, you're looking at it.
I know he was, oh, there you go.
Oh, sorry. Yes, my internet just froze briefly. Yeah. So
again, one was about upskilling managers, I think.
So while we wait for Stephen, I think Nick, you and I are aligned on
doesn't
this.
feel
Absolutely essential to upskill managers. You know, we always say this anyway. Being a manager isn't intuitive.
I think the manager creates the environment for workers to flourish. So actually, yes, kind of you can, you know, run well-being, etc. But actually, the manager plays such a pivotal part in creating the right environment, the right psychologically safe place. You know, what's acceptable, what's not. So absolutely, kind of, you know, getting your managers into your well-being strategy, then understanding it and helping them and training them in terms of how do you create that safe space, how do you let people work their way, how do you let people be their best, then absolutely, if that's not on your list, it absolutely should be.
Yep, agree.
Fantastic, Alice and Nick, that was a great session. Really great way to kick off the conference. I think we could have kept going easily for another hour, half an hour with those topics. So we'll wrap it up there. Quick break until 10:05. We'll be coming back with Rena Goldberg-Lynch, who will be talking about setting up students to work in a more diverse and inclusive work environment. So Alice, Nick, thanks very much.
Thanks,
a quick reminder that at lunchtime, Alice, you guys, is it Josh who's coming on and doing a little bit of a lunchtime?
It's me again.
Great.
Poor Josh has got COVID. He is hoping to be around tomorrow, but I'm taking the Energizer today, so I'll see you all again at lunchtime.
Lunchtime Energizer, great. Looking forward to it. Right, thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you guys at 10:05.
Thanks all.
Thanks.